Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Engaging the Phenomenon. And today I am honored to have on our guest, Jim Garrison. And Jim is founding president of Ubiquity University, which has been hosting some excellent panels on psionics via the psionic summits, which you can see on YouTube. So welcome, Jim.
Thank you.
And as we were talking before, you have quite an impressive background. Uh, it's hard to imagine you've been involved in so many different things and dealing with consciousness and a lot of things. But just for people watching and listening who may be seeing you for the first time, uh, do you have like a brief summary of your background and how you got here with Ubiquity University?
Oh boy. Well, I've had a long and very differentiated career. Uh, Probably the most important thing to note is that I did my PhD dissertation at Cambridge on the question of why it is that after several billion years of evolutionary life, our species in our generation has brought the entire life process to the brink of extinction. I pondered that for many years, and that question has really oriented everything that I've done since then. It led to work in the Soviet Union whenever you would talk about the thermonuclear weapons we were threatening each other with. People would say, we've got to have the weapons because of the Russians, because of the Russian threat. So I went over to Russia and I traveled over there and I ended up living over there and had an apartment over there. And as a result of many adventures, I ended up meeting Mikhail Gorbachev, who was president of the Soviet Union between 1985 and the end of 1991. I was actually the last foreigner that he received in his Kremlin office before he resigned. And that led to a 10-year relationship and partnership with Mikhail Gorbachev and luminaries from all over the world, Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela in South Africa, Elie Wiesel and other Nobel laureates, Jane Goodall, uh, extraordinary group of people that I had the privilege of working with through the State of the World Forum, where we convened people from all over the world in every walk of life to come together between 1995 and the year 2000 to talk about the end of the Cold War and the possibilities of a peace dividend. It was an extraordinary and transformational experience, I think, for all concerned. And I raise that because we're reconvening the forums between 2025 and 2030, because the time then as the time now was very dangerous, but also extraordinarily potentiated. I also, after my Gorbachev decade, which was terminated actually by 9/11. We did some incredible work. Then 9/11 happened, and we realized that elegant politics was no longer possible. So I went off, worked with George Soros for a couple years on globalization, and then was brought into Ubiquity University. I've been there ever since, very, very happily since 2005. In fact, this is my 20th anniversary year with the university. We've developed an ET studies program, which is unique in the world. We convene a daily broadcast called Humanity Rising. So we are really out there in world events, seeking to prepare people for how they can most capably navigate hypercomplexity.
And with that said, how did the UFO disclosure, ET, non-human intelligence angle, how did you come to be so involved in that?
Well, Danny Sheehan is one of my dearest friends. I met him actually in the mid 1970s at Harvard University, where we were both students. And we've been friends ever since. And in 1976, we both worked for the Jesuit Office of Social Ministries in Washington, D.C. And he was the general counsel. I was the director of nuclear policy. And out of nowhere, the Project Blue Book issued its declassified microfilms in the Library of Congress in the National Archives. And so, with great excitement, Danny and I went to the National Archives and were led into a room, and we looked at these little microfilms of, UFOs and all these objects, and some explained, some unexplained, and it was tremendously exciting at that time. And then I've been tracking it. I saw some UFOs in the early 90s and was very taken by that. And then several years ago in 2023, Danny called me up again and said that they were setting up the New Paradigm Institute in Washington to work exclusively on UFO disclosure, UAP disclosure. And would I come back and head up the Washington office, which I very gladly did, both to be able to work with my old friend Danny, who I respect tremendously, and also to work on an issue that I'd always believed in and known a lot about. And I've been in Washington ever since, although at the end of 2024, I left a New Paradigm Institute to return to Ubiquity University because the ET studies program was getting so big. And then the State of the World Forum was coming back into play, which will mark, by the way, the State of the World Forum coming up will mark the first time ever that there will be a conference that will simultaneously talk about the code red issues of our time: climate change, runaway artificial intelligence, the assault on women and gender fluidity, refugees, global corruption, the threat of nuclear war, geostrategic instability, along with UAP disclosure
Yeah.
and the reality that we are not alone. No one's ever brought those two issues together before, and that's going to happen at the State of the World Forum. So it's a very full time in my life. I'm very grateful for all the opportunities I've had over the decades to be of service and to learn. And it's a great time to be alive, basically.
It sure is. I mean, even in my lifetime, just in my late 30s, and I can't believe the changes I've seen in the past few years. Even I mean, for better or worse, it's like this accelerated
Sure.
timeline, right? Just like so many developments happening so fast. It's just the time we're in. I, you mentioned that you had went with Danny. So, excuse me, Daniel Sheehan. Were you there with him for that incident with the notepad where he went into the
No, no,
arc?
no.
Okay,
That
okay,
happened years later. And what he saw in the Madison building
right.
were the classified
Yes, yeah,
photos. In the 70s, we saw the unclassified.
yeah.
Danny then was given to see the classified photos.
So, and in the 90s, you said you had a few UFO sightings. Uh, could you describe them a little, just like the nature of it, and
Well,
maybe
it happened when I was in the Republic of Georgia
okay,
in the spring of 1992. And I was with a group of American businessmen who were there to help the newly formed Republic of Georgia after, the Soviet Union had broken up in December of 1991. So all the republics that participated in the Soviet Union all of a sudden found themselves overnight to be independent. So they had to put a nation together. And I'd been friends with the Soviet foreign minister under Gorbachev, a guy by the name of Edward Shevardnadze, who was Georgian. So he went back to Georgia, asked me to help bring American investment, which I did. And we were walking along a hillside outside of Tbilisi, the capital, back to our hotel. And in the sky, on the horizon, I noticed first one dot that was completely motionless. And I thought, that's strange. If it's an airplane, it should move. And all of a sudden there was two, and then all of a sudden three little dots, white dots. And then they began to move up and sideways, and then they did some configurations. And in the middle of it, I said to my assistant, Amy Vosbrink, I said, Amy, it, look at that. Do you see what I see? And she looked and she said, yeah, that's weird. And then I called all the American executives. There was about probably four, five, six of them, and they started to watch. And then all of a sudden, after these objects did these things, uh, they just poof disappeared.
Yeah.
And we all just stood there kind of quiet. And then one of them said, I think we've just seen a UFO. and so that's the incident back in the 1990s, and but it reconfirmed what I already believed and knew, that we're not alone. It takes more faith to believe that we're alone in this vast cosmos than to believe that we're not alone. And so the ET issue has always been important to me. So when Danny called me up in the fall of 2023 and said, "Hey, we need you back in Washington. The government's going to pass this legislation that what turned out to be the UAP Records Collection Act, that signed in December of 2023, and great excitement and all. It was great. It's great.
And
This subject. I think this is the most important subject in the world right now.
absolutely, I think it has one of the greatest potentials in I think bringing people together, uh, both in not only curiosity but also discovery and implication, right? Uh, I, so I noticed a lot of times you say ET, right? And as far as extraterrestrial intelligence, is there a reason you use that specifically? In I guess in comparison to non-human intelligence, or is it just a term that you've been using and are familiar with?
Well, we're in one of those periods of word creation. If you think, 50 years ago, you referred to UFOs, and that was the only term that was sort of available. And then people started to meet the beings, and they started to talk about extraterrestrials. And then as things got more researched and more complex, all of a sudden the US government decides we don't want to say UFO, we want to say unidentified anomalous phenomena. Um, and we don't want to talk about ETs, we want to talk about non-human intelligences, NHI. But my view is that when you say NHI, you always have to explain it.
Yeah,
When you say ET, everybody knows what you mean.
yeah,
When you say UAP, most people say, well, what? Then you say, well, UFOs. And they say, oh, yeah, I know what a UFO is.
yeah,
So, you know, eventually we're going to have more and more words to describe this very complex phenomenon. Like the Eskimos have what, 30, 40 words for snow, and the Tibetan Buddhists have 60, 70 words for consciousness. We're going to go from one word and then two words, UFO and ET. And over the next 5, 10 years, now there's crypto terrestrials, there's ultra terrestrials, there's all kinds of different terrestrials, and uh, UAP is giving then drones and orbs, and we're going to differentiate. Now we got psionics
yeah.
as a word that just popped out. And then I would say in 5 to 10 years, James, we're going to have a very rich lexicon by and through which to describe an experience that is getting more and more layered and nuanced. Because this is not only the most important development in human history, it's also the most vast. and the most extraordinary and complex. So we'll probably eventually have dozens, if not hundreds of words to describe as we meet different species. And there's the reptilians, and then there's the grays, but then there's the short grays, and then there's the tall grays, and there's the avians, and there's the Arcturians and so forth. Those are all words that are going to enter our lexicon. It's a wonderful time.
Yeah, and and you mentioned the psionics, which is fascinating. And now, in Jake Barber's most recent discussion with Ross Coulthart and Matthew Pines, he introduced neuromeditative as a term that they're using with the new Skywatcher developments to specifically point to what they're looking at and trying to study in regards to psionics is like more of the uh like pop term, and the neuro meditative being the scientific precise, and of course we're going to see developments from there. And now psionics, you held two extraordinary panels on that, which are great. I think those are great developments. And so for people watching and listening, the psionic term, we've all been hearing it. How would you define the term psionics?
I think that what psionics is at its root, if you look at the etymology of psi, it's the psyche, it's consciousness. It is that which uh, holds the awareness of being. And it's very undefined, particularly in the West, because we've not even agreed that consciousness exists until very, very recently. It's only been in the mystical traditions and the indigenous traditions, and of course in the Eastern traditions. It's that consciousness is taken as a reality. And that's why the Tibetan Buddhists have, I think, 60, 70 different words for consciousness. But in the West, since the Enlightenment, we basically said it didn't exist. And up until just a few years ago, it wasn't studied in any of the mainstream universities, and it still isn't.
Yeah.
You take someone like Rupert Sheldrake, a very good friend of mine from my Cambridge days. He wanted to study the paraphenomenal, clairvoyance, all kinds of things, and he was completely ostracized. He gave a talk on TED,
That was
about,
removed.
and
Yeah.
it was removed.
Yeah.
So when we talk about consciousness, everybody, this is not only a new term, but like UFOs, it's been a dirty term. It's been a term that hasn't been allowed in polite company.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden come the ETs, and people all over the world start to have contact. And they realize and they report that the ETs don't talk. They communicate through mental telepathy. And all of a sudden, these humans who've had contact, either through abductions or, sightings, the what is it, the C4, um, and
CE5.
CE4 and CE5, uh, you begin to realize that these beings are not only real, but that you can only communicate with them in the language of consciousness. So what's happening, and this is what's so exciting and why I'm in this full time, is because I think psionics is the future. Because I'd make 2 points. Number one, we're way past, are they real or not? They're here. The US government said that in the UAP Records Collection Act in 2023. Lou Elizondo, Ross Coulthart, David Grush, Carl Nell, Jake Barber, anybody who's talking these days with huge institutional intelligence, military, scientific credibility, Gary Nolan, they're here, folks. As Carl Nell said, there's zero doubt.
Yeah.
So since that's true, not if that's true, since that's true. We got to get about the business of who are they? Why are they here? How do we communicate with them? How do we build community with them? That's the task. And in order to do that, we have to learn psionics. We have to learn the language of the psyche. We have to learn the language of mental telepathy and remote viewing. And the reason why that's critical is that we are also teetering on the brink of self-destruction because the consciousness that produced the problem can't solve the problem. We can't solve climate change. We can't solve uh, AI. We can't solve world hunger. We can't solve the rift because we keep trying to solve it with the consciousness that produced it. But guess what? Right at the moment when we're teetering on the brink of the precipice, the heavens open. The NHI, ETs, whatever you want to call them, have appeared. And humans, by the thousands all over the world, are starting to learn the language of consciousness. And it's learning the language of consciousness that's going to give humanity the consciousness to solve our problems. So the fact that they've shown up since 1945 when the United States dropped those first atomic bombs over Japan is not accidental. It's synchronistic because they've been warning us, stop your nuclear weapons, stop your ecological devastation, and get about the business of transformation. And it's our learning that language, our participating in psionics that is the key to human survival. And that's why Ubiquity University has its extraterrestrial studies program in partnership with Transdimensional Mapping and Bertie Jaworski. She's one of the leading, most well-known remote viewers in the world. She predicted 9/11, drew pictures of it 2 years before the event. And she's got an extraordinary remote viewing technique called transdimensional mapping, which I've taken. And it was when I took that course that I met my first ET. It was an extraordinary experience. So, where we are as a human race, as a species in our evolutionary journey, is this equipoise between destruction because we can't keep it together and redemption if we learn the language of consciousness, because the ETs ultimately are here to warn us and help us. And I know there's a lot of discussion, are there good ETs or bad ETs and all of that? Absolutely. There's light and dark dimensions in every quadrant of the universe. But look at it this way. When you get sore on your finger, your whole body knows it and sends little white blood cells and all these other good things to heal the sore. Similarly, because everything in the cosmos is interconnected, when one of the planetary systems starts to veer off course as the apex species starts to self-destruct and bring the planetary ecology to the danger zone, that sends alarm bells out through at least our quadrant of the galaxy. And the galaxy, which is a living organism, the sun, the planets, the moon, the earth, they're living organisms. We're part of Earth. So as our species has distorted the life path and brought us to this critical danger zone, the rest of the our galactic neighbors are showing up to warn us and to help us to get back on the right path. So overwhelmingly, the people who've had any contact with the extraterrestrials report it as among, if not the most transformational experience in their life, because the contact instills new consciousness. So we want to teach people the psionics, the language of consciousness, how to engage, how to learn who they are, and then how to engage in intelligible communication with a view of building community with them in this critical hour.
All right. How to engage the phenomenon, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
how to engage the phenomenon. That's
I
what Ubiquity University and our ET Studies program and Birdie and her transdimensional mapping system is all about.
I had that realization back in around 2007 when I had a series of really in-your-face experiences with contact and high strangeness and UFOs and ETs or non-human intelligence. And I had the realization that you can tell people about this and to intellectually grasp it is one thing, but once you have the firsthand experience, that everything kind of just clicks into place as far as the
Exactly.
realization of like, wow, this is real and this what it means. And yeah, again, your place as a sentient, intelligent being in the universe and your interconnectedness with uh, everything, right? You can say
Exactly.
you have that kind of realization
Yeah. It all gets clear.
viscerally, right? Like
Viscerally.
not intellectually, it's on an embodiment level. And that's why I had gotten so involved in the CE5 initiative early on, because I had realized that you need people have to have their own experience ultimately to really, have to have the rubber meet the road. And so I've been supportive of uh, contact modalities, and I'm really grateful to see, Jake Barber and his crew, everybody that's with him, forming Skywatcher and putting together that initiative, and then having the collaboration with somebody like Dr. Gary Nolan and Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell and others are just coming on board and participating in such an important endeavor. And I'm optimistic that we're going to have a greater sharing of information in regards to that. Uh, but you have been talking about the Ubiquity University courses, the transdimensional mapping. Just to summarize that, how would you describe that to people first hearing that term?
It's a learning system to teach people remote viewing. If you can engage in remote viewing and the mental telepathy that that implies, you, as a byproduct of that, can engage in intelligible communication with invisible intelligences, shall we say. Um, Learning interspecies communication. If you have a facility in terms of your pets or dolphins, or you are a tree whisperer or a horse whisperer or whatever, any capacity that we have that enables us to engage in an interspecies communication at the level of telepathy, that enables you to talk to other species anywhere. So part of the transdimensional mapping that Bertie Jaworski has developed, it's very fun. One of the key things is you got to sort of shut down your left brain,
Yeah.
activate your right brain, and that is the key. Most of us are completely left brain. And by the way, all the social media that the kids use all takes them to their left brain. So our right brain is getting more and more deficient. So that's what we have to animate is our right brain. And there are techniques for doing that. There's meditative techniques that can be done. Transdimensional mapping is one of many techniques. It happens to be the most sophisticated, in my view, the most sophisticated remote viewing technique. But there are people that communicate with the ETs just by going into a meditative state. I mean, look at Chris Bledsoe. Chris Bledsoe is teaching a course And for him, it's ex- a spiritual experience of just opening himself up to Our Lady, as he calls her, and the orbs come down. I mean, this is a phenomenal thing. So there's some aspect of the purity of one's heart and the clarity of one's intention that can facilitate these kinds of encounters.
Yeah, and I'll say, similar to what Jacques Vallée had called the post-contact effects. And it's been given like a more modern, almost like a negative connotation slant in the hitchhiker effect. But it's not. It hadn't always had that negative slant, so to speak. It's been given that, but really
Yeah,
there's positive hitchhiker effect, which you can call high strangeness, or what Jacques Vallée had called post-contact effects, where when you find yourself in a situation with a UFO encounter or non-human intelligence, what's fascinating is those other faculties naturally come
exactly.
online, right?
Exactly.
And there's no thinking involved, like, oh, wait, how do I do this? It's just known. It's like a universal language that's inherent within us.
Yeah.
And so you can go at it from either angle, right? From either having an encounter or initiating an encounter with psionics or CE5 contact modalities, or through the remote viewing, transdimensional mapping, and kind of like either way, it's like a positive feedback loop. And I think one of the more interesting things about that, actually, it's like kind of the bigger picture view, is that it opens up this language or dialogue with reality itself, uh, where it's more of like you're more conscious and aware of what John Wheeler would call the participatory universe,
Yeah.
in that
Yeah.
you can become more aware of the subtleties of your interaction. Of what are you putting out, and how is the universe responding, and kind of in turn to that, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
and it's
Exactly.
and I think that's almost like much huger um, kind of thing. But all of it's important. All of it's part of an important journey. And uh, so, in regards to the courses you just mentioned, the transcendental dimensional mapping, and Christopher Bledsoe has like a course going on for uh, it's a pretty in-depth course from what it looks like. Where can people find that?
Go to ubiquityuniversity.org and you'll see on the top menu bar courses. You just click on courses and scroll down to live webinars. And you can also go into our degree pages and see our ET studies uh, degree page. And because you can take transdimensional mapping or our ET studies, you develop 20 credits, and then you can get a master's or PhD degree in extraterrestrial studies.
Oh,
And
really cool. Yeah.
so we want to train people in the language of consciousness. We've got Bertie Jaworski's going to do a live um, journey, a learning journey in Taos, New Mexico, the 1st to the 4th of May. I'm going to go, and we're going to learn more remote viewing and communicate out in the desert each night with the ETs. And then Bertie Jaworski and Chris Bledsoe are going to do a course together in August. In Wilmington, North Carolina. And, just Chris brings down the orbs every night, man. This guy is really good at what he does. And there are other courses that we're going to have every month. We have some kind of course on the weekends. We have courses, so people should just go to ubiquityuniversity.org and look for our ET studies program. It's right there on our homepage.
Yeah, and I'm gonna link everything in the description so people can have easy access to that, and start
Yeah,
to kind of go down the rabbit hole, so to speak, of
yeah, And you can take a course and never see us again, or you can take a bunch of courses and just audit as you were, as it were, or you can take courses in a disciplined way and accumulate 20 credits worth, and then you can go in for a master's and PhD. You'd be part of the first cohort. We have about 20, 25 people in the program. It's very exciting. It's very, very, very exciting.
Yeah. And also, you guys have a YouTube channel where you can see like the psionic summits, and
Yeah.
there's a wealth of information there. You know, uh, I want to thank you for coming on, Jim. I know our time is limited. It's
Sure.
great to finally speak with you. I hope to speak to you again sometime soon. Uh, would you have a parting message for the people watching and listening in regards to psionics, the reality of ETs or non-human intelligence, and the importance of the subject
Yeah, that's a good question.
in 2 minutes or less? No.
Yeah. I would summarize it in the following way, James. I would say there's now zero doubt, everyone, that we are not alone, that extraterrestrials are here. There's been contact, and the overwhelming report, consensus about what they've been saying to human beings for the past 80 years all around the world is to warn us to stop our proliferation of nuclear weapons and to stop our degradation of the environment. They tell us that we have one of the most beautiful, most rare planetary systems in the known galaxy. Most planets are much different than ours. Ours is very biologically and ecologically diverse and very dense. And as we're coming into contact with them, we're learning psionics. We're learning the language of consciousness. And this is so exciting for humans to begin to communicate, not how you and I are talking with our words, but with our minds. Because once we learn how to communicate with our minds, we can communicate with any sentient being anywhere. And that's going to open up a possible future for humanity that not only is more wondrous than we imagine, but is more wondrous probably than we can imagine. And one of the benefits is that this new consciousness, this new language of consciousness, is going to raise and refine our consciousness and allow us to look at our critical problems and solve them definitively for the first time, because the consciousness that produces the problem can't solve the problem. So those are all the reasons why this is such an exciting period and why Ubiquity University wanted to pioneer the study and the awareness and communication with extraterrestrial beings. We believe that this is the cutting edge of human evolution. And we welcome any and all of you to join us in this great enterprise. So just go to ubiquityuniversity.org. It's very exciting.
Definitely. And I encourage everybody to go there. I'm going to link all the links in the description so people can find that easily and start to dive in. And I thank you so much for everything that you're doing in this work, and sharing the information and the knowledge, and getting people to participate in this kind
Pleasure.
of, yeah. So thank you so much. And I hope to speak to you again sometime soon.
Okay, brother. Be
Take
well.
care.